When the hedge fund manager boarded the first-class cabin of United Airlines Flight 2187 from New York to Los Angeles, he had no idea his arrogance was about to meet its match. Before we dive into this incredible story of humility and redemption, comment below where you're watching from today. The first-class lounge at JFK International Airport hummed with the quiet energy of luxury travel. Crystal glasses clinked softly against silver trays, and the air carried the subtle scent of expensive cologne mixed with freshly brewed artisanal coffee. Among the well-dressed travelers sat a man in comfortable black training pants and a simple dark hoodie, his athletic frame relaxed in one of the plush leather chairs. Wesley Snipes had just finished an intense morning workout session, choosing comfort over style for the 6-hour flight ahead. He sat quietly reading a book on martial arts philosophy, his presence subtle yet commanding, even in casual attire. Years of martial arts training and screen presence had given him an aura that no designer's suit could match. Alexander Burke, however, lived by a different code. Fresh from closing a billion-dollar deal, the hedge fund manager's bespoke suit and platinum watch weren't just accessories, they were weapons in his arsenal of intimidation. As he strode through the lounge, his eyes swept dismissively over anyone he deemed beneath his station. Sarah Chin, the lead flight attendant, noticed both men immediately. 15 years of experience had taught her to read people quickly, and these two were a study in contrasts. One carried himself with natural ease, the other with practiced superiority. She had a feeling their upcoming flight might be interesting. The boarding process began smoothly enough. Emily Parker, the junior flight attendant, guided passengers to their seats with practiced efficiency. But when Alexander Burke saw who would be sitting next to him in seat 2A, his perfectly manicured eyebrows rose in obvious disapproval. Michael Thompson, seated across the aisle, glanced up from his laptop just in time to witness what would become one of the most talked-about encounters in first-class history. He would later tell his wife that he knew something was about to happen the moment he saw Burke's face twist into that condescending smirk. "I believe there's been a mistake," Alexander announced loudly, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for those accustomed to having their every whim accommodated. "This section is first class." His eyes ran deliberately over Wesley's casual attire, making his meaning clear. Wesley simply smiled, the kind of smile that had graced movie posters worldwide but held a hint of something more, a quiet confidence born of knowing exactly who he was. He reached for his seatbelt without responding, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Rebecca Wong, the travel journalist seated in 3C, recognized Wesley immediately. She had interviewed him twice over the years and knew that what was about to unfold would make for a far more interesting story than her planned article on luxury travel trends. "Perhaps," Alexander continued, his voice dripping with faux concern, "you've wandered in from economy? Easy mistake to make." He gestured to Emily Parker as if summoning a servant. "The young lady can direct you to the correct section." David Martinez, a regular business traveler who had witnessed his share of first-class drama, found himself setting aside his financial reports. This was shaping up to be far more entertaining than quarterly projections. Thomas Anderson, Alexander's business associate in 1C, shifted uncomfortably. He had worked with Alexander long enough to know the man's penchant for public displays of superiority, but something about this situation felt different. The casual passenger carried himself with too much quiet confidence to be someone who had wandered into the wrong section by mistake. Lisa Reynolds, assisting with the final boarding preparations, caught Sarah Chen's eye. Both flight attendants had recognized Wesley the moment he boarded, but years of professional discretion kept them from acknowledging it openly. Besides, something told them this situation would resolve itself in due time. "I assure you," Alexander pressed on, adjusting his platinum cufflinks with practiced precision, "first class has certain standards. I'm sure you understand." His smile didn't reach his eyes, which held the cold calculation of someone used to having their way through intimidation and social pressure. Wesley turned slightly in his seat, studying Alexander with the kind of patience that comes from decades of martial arts training and Hollywood experience. His response, when it came, was quiet but carried easily in the hushed cabin. "Oh, I understand plenty. Please, don't let me make you uncomfortable." The seeming acquiescence in Wesley's voice only encouraged Alexander further. "It's not about comfort," he declared, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. "It's about maintaining appropriate distinctions. Surely you can appreciate that some spaces are reserved for those who've earned them." James Collins, the flight captain doing his pre-flight cabin check, paused briefly near their seats. He had flown enough celebrities to recognize Wesley Snipes instantly, but more than that, he recognized the type of situation unfolding. Sometimes the best course of action was to let certain lessons teach themselves. Sarah Chin approached with practiced grace, ostensibly to offer pre-flight drinks. "Can I get you gentlemen anything before takeoff?" Her eyes met Wesley's with professional neutrality, though the slight crinkle at their corners suggested she was enjoying the situation more than she let on. "Champagne," Alexander declared without looking at her. "The Dom Perignon if you have it, though I doubt my fille would know the difference between that and Prosecco." He laughed shortly, clearly expecting appreciation for his wine knowledge. Wesley's response was to pull out a worn book, a treatise on martial arts philosophy, and begin reading, his posture relaxed but his presence somehow filling the space without effort. The contrast between his calm demeanor and Alexander's increasing agitation was becoming more apparent by the moment. The other first-class passengers had given up any pretense of not watching the scene unfold. Rebecca Wong had discreetly activated her phone's voice recorder, while Michael Thompson found himself wondering if this would end up being one of those viral stories about karma and humility. As the final boarding announcements echoed through the cabin, Alexander made one last attempt to assert his perceived superiority. "You know," he said, his voice pitched to carry, "I've earned my place here through years of hard work and billion-dollar deals. I wouldn't expect someone like you to understand the value of that." The irony of his words hung in the air like expensive cologne, cloying and obvious to everyone except the man who had spoken them. Wesley simply turned another page in his book, his silence more powerful than any retort could have been. Lisa Reynolds returned with Alexander's champagne, her service professional but her eyes occasionally darting to Wesley with a mix of admiration and anticipation. She, like everyone else in the cabin, could sense that this story was far from over. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, the tension in first class had taken on an almost theatrical quality. Alexander sipped his champagne with exaggerated appreciation, while Wesley continued reading, seemingly oblivious to the drama his presence had created. But those who looked closely might have noticed the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth, the kind of expression that suggested he had faced similar situations before and found them more amusing than offensive. After all, when you've played everything from Blade to Simon Phoenix, you learn that true character reveals itself in how you handle those who underestimate you. The stage was set, the players were in place, and as the massive engines roared to life, nobody in first class was paying attention to the safety demonstration. They were all too busy watching what was shaping up to be a masterclass in humility, taught by a man in a hoodie to a man in an expensive suit who had no idea he was about to become the student. As United Airlines Flight 2187 reached its cruising altitude, the atmosphere in first class had taken on the tense anticipation of a theater just before the curtain rises. Alexander Burke, emboldened by both champagne and an audience, had decided to transform his seat into a pulpit from which to preach his philosophy of social hierarchy. "You see," he announced to no one in particular, though his words were clearly meant for his casually dressed seatmate, "first class isn't just about the wider seats or better champagne. It's about being among equals." He adjusted his platinum watch with deliberate precision, ensuring the light caught its face. "It's about maintaining certain standards." Wesley Snipes turned another page in his martial arts book, his composed demeanor a stark contrast to Alexander's increasing agitation. The actor's silence seemed to occupy more space than Alexander's words, drawing the attention of everyone in the cabin without demanding it. Sarah Chen approached their seats with the grace of someone who had navigated similar situations countless times before. "Would either of you care to see our lunch menu?" she asked, her professional tone masking her growing admiration for Wesley's restraint. "Ah, yes," Alexander practically purred, accepting the leather-bound menu with the air of a connoisseur. "Though perhaps you should bring the economy menu for my companion here. Wouldn't want to overwhelm him with too many choices." He chuckled at his own wit, looking around for appreciation that didn't come. Michael Thompson, watching from across the aisle, found himself marveling at Wesley's composure. Lesser men would have snapped by now, would have pulled the celebrity card or demanded respect. Instead, Wesley simply smiled at Sarah and requested the chicken teriyaki, his voice carrying the calm, measured tone that had commanded attention in countless films. Rebecca Wong, the travel journalist, had long since abandoned any pretense of working on her laptop. This was the kind of human drama that editors dreamed of, a real-time lesson in humility unfolding at 35,000 feet. "I suppose," Alexander continued, swirling his second glass of champagne, "you're wondering how someone like me affords to travel this way regularly." He gestured to his bespoke suit and handmade Italian shoes. "It comes from understanding value, from knowing how to move in certain circles." David Martinez, himself a successful businessman, couldn't help but cringe at Alexander's display. He had encountered plenty of self-made men in his career, but the truly successful ones rarely felt the need to broadcast their achievements quite so loudly. Emily Parker arrived with warm towels, offering them first to Wesley with a slight smile that didn't go unnoticed by Alexander. His face darkened momentarily before he plastered on an even more condescending smile. "Tell me," he said, leaning toward Wesley, "what exactly do you do that allows you to attempt this level of travel?" Wesley finally closed his book, marking his place with deliberate care. "I'm in the entertainment industry," he said simply, his voice carrying none of the pretense that filled Alexander's carefully modulated tones. "Entertainment?" Alexander's eyebrows shot up with mock interest. "How fascinating. What are you, some sort of street performer? Though I suppose even performers have to travel sometimes." His laugh was sharp and meant to cut. Thomas Anderson, Alexander's business associate, seemed to sink lower in his seat, as if trying to physically distance himself from the increasingly uncomfortable display. He had seen that look of quiet amusement on Wesley's face before, on movie posters and magazine covers spanning decades. Lisa Reynolds appeared with their appetizers, her service professional but her eyes sparkling with anticipation. She had been quietly updating the other flight attendants about the situation during her breaks, and word had spread throughout the crew that something extraordinary was unfolding in first class. "You know," Alexander proclaimed, cutting into his foie gras with surgical precision, "I once considered investing in entertainment. But it's such an unstable industry, full of dreamers and wannabes who never quite make it." He looked pointedly at Wesley's casual attire. "I prefer to deal in more substantial ventures." Wesley took a sip of water, his movements unhurried. "And what would you consider substantial?" he asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. Alexander launched into a detailed monologue about his latest hedge fund deals, his voice carrying the rehearsed quality of someone who had delivered this speech many times before. He name-dropped prestigious firms and astronomical figures, each word carefully chosen to establish his superiority. James Collins, the flight captain, chose that moment to walk through the cabin on one of his regular checks. He paused briefly near their seats, exchanging a knowing look with Sarah Chin. Both had seen enough of life to recognize when karma was about to teach a masterclass. "But enough about me," Alexander said, though his tone suggested he could hardly imagine a more fascinating subject. "Tell me more about your entertainment work. Do you perform at children's parties? Corporate events?" His smile was shark-like. "I might be able to throw some work your way if you're lucky." Rebecca Wong had to bite her lip to keep from laughing out loud. She had interviewed Wesley multiple times over the years and knew his reputation for handling difficult situations with grace. This was proving to be no exception. "That's very kind of you," Wesley replied, his voice carrying that characteristic calm that had made him a martial arts master both on and off screen. "But I tend to stay pretty busy with my current projects." "Oh, I'm sure you do," Alexander said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Everyone's always busy these days. But let me give you some advice. Someone in your position should learn to network with the right people. People like me who could open doors for you." Michael Thompson watched as Wesley's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the only visible sign that he was thoroughly enjoying the irony of the situation. The actor's restraint was becoming something of a performance in itself, though his audience had no idea they were watching a master at work. The meal service continued, with Alexander becoming increasingly expansive in his self-promotion. He detailed his rise through the ranks of finance, his multiple homes, his connections to the corporate elite. Each story was clearly designed to emphasize the vast gulf he perceived between himself and his seatmate. Sarah Chen returned to check on them, her professional mask slightly cracking as she heard Alexander explaining to Wesley the difference between business and first class as if teaching arithmetic to a child. "You see," he was saying, "some people are simply meant for greater things. It's about understanding your place in the world." The other first-class passengers had given up any pretense of not listening. David Martinez had pushed aside his laptop entirely, while Thomas Anderson seemed to be trying to disappear into his seat. They, like everyone else in the cabin, could sense that this situation was building toward something momentous. As the flight progressed, Alexander's behavior became increasingly theatrical. He made a show of every interaction with the crew, emphasized every luxury the first-class cabin offered, and continued to pepper Wesley with condescending advice about knowing one's place in the world. Wesley, for his part, maintained his calm demeanor, responding to Alexander's provocations with small smiles and occasional nods. His responses, when they came, were measured and thoughtful, showing none of the defensiveness or irritation that Alexander seemed determined to provoke. Lisa Reynolds approached with fresh drinks, just in time to hear Alexander launching into another self-aggrandizing story. "You know," he was saying, "I just closed a deal that would probably equal your entire year's income. Maybe more." He paused, clearly expecting some sign of awe or envy. Instead, Wesley simply smiled, that same calm, knowing smile that had graced countless movie posters. "That's quite an achievement," he said, his voice carrying no trace of sarcasm or resentment. "You must be very proud." The sincerity in Wesley's response seemed to throw Alexander slightly off balance. He had clearly expected either intimidation or antagonism, and this graceful acceptance of his boasting left him momentarily at a loss. But only momentarily. "Well," Alexander recovered, straightening his tie, "that's the difference between people like me and, well, people like you. We understand the value of ambition, of presentation, of maintaining certain standards." He gestured dismissively at Wesley's casual attire. "Some people are content to merely drift through life, never reaching for something greater." The irony of his words hung in the air like expensive cologne, obvious to everyone except the man who had spoken them. As the flight continued its journey across America, the stage was set for a revelation that would transform this first-class cabin into a theater of the absurd, where lessons about true class and genuine success were about to be taught in the most unexpected way. 3 hours into the flight from New York to Los Angeles, fate decided to play its hand. The moment came not with a dramatic announcement or a grand gesture, but with the innocent enthusiasm of a teenage passenger from business class who had come forward to use the first-class lavatory. The boy, about 15, stopped dead in his tracks as he passed row 2. His eyes widened with the pure, unfiltered excitement that only young fans can truly express. "Oh my God," he gasped, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're Blade. You're Wesley Snipes." Alexander Burke, who had been midway through another story about his financial prowess, froze with his champagne glass halfway to his lips. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the gentle hum of the aircraft engines. Sarah Chen, who had been waiting for this moment since takeoff, couldn't quite suppress her smile as she gently tried to guide the young fan back to his section. But Wesley, with the warmth and grace he was famous for, was already turning in his seat. "How you doing, young man?" he said, his familiar voice carrying that signature mix of strength and kindness that had made him one of Hollywood's most iconic actors. "What's your name?" Alexander's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The blood seemed to drain from it in stages, like a building losing power floor by floor. His eyes darted between Wesley and the boy, his brain visibly struggling to reconcile the past few hours with this new reality. Rebecca Wong, who had been documenting the entire interaction, found herself witnessing the exact moment when realization dawned in Alexander's eyes. The man who had spent hours lecturing someone like you about success was suddenly confronting the fact that he had been condescending to one of Hollywood's most successful action stars. Michael Thompson watched as Alexander's carefully constructed facade of superiority crumbled. The hedge fund manager's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. His platinum cufflinks caught the cabin light as his hands trembled slightly. Around the first-class cabin, the reaction was spreading like ripples in a pond. David Martinez set aside his financial reports entirely, no longer bothering to hide his interest in the unfolding drama. Thomas Anderson, Alexander's business associate, seemed to be trying to physically merge with his seat. Emily Parker approached with a professional smile, though her eyes danced with barely contained amusement. "Mr. Snipes," she said, "would you like anything? A fresh drink perhaps?" The deliberate use of his name seemed to drive the final nail into Alexander's coffin of superiority. Wesley, however, maintained the same calm, friendly demeanor he'd displayed throughout the flight. "I'm fine, thanks," he replied before turning back to the young fan who was still staring at him in awe. "Would you like an autograph?" The contrast between Wesley's genuine warmth and Alexander's earlier condescension couldn't have been more stark. Here was a man who had every right to lord his success over others, choosing instead to focus on making a young fan's day special. Lisa Reynolds appeared with a pen and paper, seemingly out of nowhere, as Wesley spent several minutes chatting with the boy about his favorite movies. The genuine enthusiasm and kindness in these interactions stood in sharp relief against Alexander's hours of pretension. James Collins, making another pass through the cabin, paused to watch the scene unfold. The flight captain had seen his share of celebrity passengers, but few handled themselves with the grace Wesley was displaying in this moment. Alexander, meanwhile, had become intensely interested in the view outside his window, though his reflection in the plexiglass betrayed a face flushed with embarrassment. His earlier boasts about billion-dollar deals seemed particularly hollow now, considering he had spent hours lecturing an actor whose films had grossed billions worldwide. "You know," Wesley said casually after the boy had returned to his seat clutching his autograph, "I actually started out as a dancer and trained in martial arts. Drama school graduate too." His tone was conversational, carrying no hint of retaliation or spite. The entertainment industry can be quite rewarding if you're willing to put in the work. Sarah Chen had to turn away to hide her smile as Alexander seemed to physically deflate in his expensive suit. The man who had been so eager to dispense career advice was now faced with the fact that he had attempted to mentor an actor who had starred in some of Hollywood's biggest franchises. The other passengers in first class were making no effort to hide their interest now. Rebecca Wong was openly taking notes, while Michael Thompson had given up any pretense of working on his laptop. This was the kind of moment that would be retold countless times, a perfect parable about the dangers of assumption and arrogance. I had no idea," Alexander finally managed to stammer, his voice having lost all its earlier pomposity. "I mean, I didn't recognize your clothes." He trailed off, seemingly realizing that each word was only making things worse. Wesley's response was characteristic of the man known in Hollywood for his martial arts discipline and professional courtesy. "No worries," he said easily. "You weren't wrong about one thing. Presentation can be important. But sometimes the most comfortable clothes are the best choice for a long flight." He smiled and there wasn't a trace of mockery in it. Thomas Anderson seized this moment to lean forward. "Mr. Snipes," he said, his voice carrying an eagerness that contrasted sharply with his earlier attempt to disappear, "I loved your performance in New Jack City. Simply incredible." The mention of one of Wesley's most acclaimed roles seemed to physically pain Alexander, whose earlier dismissal of the entertainment industry as unstable and full of dreamers hung in the air like an abandoned script. David Martinez, who had remained silent throughout the flight, finally spoke up. "You know, Mr. Snipes, my son practices martial arts because of you. Your influence goes beyond just movies." His genuine admiration served to emphasize how false Alexander's earlier condescension had been. Wesley engaged warmly with these comments, discussing his various roles and martial arts training with the same unpretentious enthusiasm he'd shown throughout his career. He spoke about the challenges of different characters, the discipline of martial arts, and the importance of respecting all paths in life, all while Alexander seemed to be attempting to physically shrink into his expensive suit. Sarah Chen returned with fresh drinks, this time placing Wesley's first without any prompting. The subtle shift in service wasn't lost on Alexander, whose earlier demands for special treatment now seemed particularly gauche in comparison to Wesley's gracious behavior. "The thing about success," Wesley said thoughtfully, though he wasn't specifically addressing Alexander, "is that it comes in many forms. I've been fortunate in my career, but I've learned that true success isn't about what you achieve, it's about how you treat people along the way." The irony of this statement, given Alexander's earlier behavior, was lost on no one. Rebecca Wong was writing furiously now, recognizing that she had witnessed something far more valuable than a simple celebrity encounter. This was a masterclass in handling difficult situations with grace and dignity. Lisa Reynolds approached one final time, her professional demeanor slightly softened by admiration. "Mr. Snipes," she said, "the chef wanted to know if you'd like to try his special dessert preparation. He's quite a fan of your work." The contrast between this genuine respect and Alexander's manufactured importance was striking. Wesley accepted the offer with genuine appreciation, while Alexander seemed to be reconsidering every life choice that had led him to this moment. As the flight continued over America's heartland, the atmosphere in first class had transformed. The man in the expensive suit had been revealed as a paper tiger, while the casually dressed passenger he had dismissed had proven to be not just a star, but a lesson in genuine class. The story of what happened next would be shared in corporate boardrooms and entertainment industry gatherings alike, a reminder that true class has nothing to do with the price of one's suit or the label on one's shoes. It has everything to do with how you treat others, especially when you think they have nothing to offer you. As United Airlines Flight 2187 began its descent into Los Angeles, the first-class cabin had become a stage for a different kind of performance, one of grace, humility, and redemption. The remaining hours of the flight had transformed what began as a tale of arrogance into a powerful lesson about judgment and genuine character. Alexander Burke, the man who had spent hours broadcasting his importance, now sat in uncomfortable silence, his bespoke suit feeling more like a costume than a symbol of status. The magnitude of his misjudgment seemed to weigh on him with each passing minute, his earlier bravado replaced by a palpable sense of regret. Wesley Snipes, however, showed no sign of satisfaction at Alexander's discomfort. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone in the cabin. He engaged Alexander in genuine conversation. Not about status or success, but about life, challenges, and the importance of looking beneath the surface. "You know," Wesley said, his voice carrying no trace of resentment, "I've learned that everyone has a story worth hearing. Sometimes the most valuable connections come from the most unexpected places." The words weren't delivered as a rebuke, but as a gentle invitation to dialogue. Sarah Chen, making her final rounds through the cabin, witnessed something remarkable. Alexander, his defensive armor finally cracked, began to speak not as the self-important hedge fund manager, but as a human being. He spoke of the pressure to maintain an image, the constant need to prove himself, the exhausting performance of perpetual superiority. Michael Thompson, still watching from across the aisle, saw the moment for what it was, not a victory of celebrity over arrogance, but a reminder that genuine connection happens when we drop our pretenses and speak truth to one another. "I've been in finance for 20 years, Alexander admitted, his voice having lost its earlier pompous tone, "and somewhere along the way, I started believing that worth was measured by the size of your deals or the exclusivity of your connections." He paused, looking down at his platinum cufflinks as if seeing them for the first time. "I forgot what it meant to simply be human." Rebecca Wong, who had documented the entire journey, realized she was witnessing not just an ending, but a beginning. This wasn't a story about humiliation or comeuppance. It was about transformation and the possibility of change, even at 35,000 feet. Wesley shared stories from his own journey, the struggles, the doubts, the moments when he questioned everything. He spoke about his early days as a dancer, about being told he'd never make it in Hollywood, about learning that true success comes not from proving others wrong, but from staying true to yourself. Emily Parker, bringing the final round of refreshments before landing, heard Wesley talking about his martial arts training. The actor's eyes lit up as he described the discipline required, how it had taught him more about strength than any action role ever could. "That's why I prefer these clothes when I travel," Wesley explained, gesturing to his comfortable attire. Martial arts teaches you that true power isn't about what you wear or how much money you have. It's about discipline, respect, and understanding. Alexander listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in years. The other passengers watched as his face softened, the mask of superiority giving way to something more authentic. "I think," he said slowly, "I've been measuring success by the wrong metrics." David Martinez, who had witnessed the entire transformation, spoke up. "Sometimes," he offered, "our greatest achievements have nothing to do with what we own or how important we seem to others. Sometimes they're about the moments when we choose to be kind, to be real." Thomas Anderson, who had spent most of the flight trying to distance himself from Alexander's behavior, now engaged in the conversation. He spoke about his own journey of realizing that true respect can't be demanded, it can only be earned through how we treat others. Lisa Reynolds approached with landing cards, smiling as she heard the genuine exchange of ideas and experiences. The first-class cabin had become something rare, a space for authentic connection and honest reflection. James Collins, making his final pass through the cabin before landing, paused to observe the scene. In his years of flying, he had seen countless displays of status and importance, but rarely had he witnessed such a genuine transformation. "You want to know the real secret of first class?" Wesley asked, his voice carrying that calm wisdom that had served him well both in martial arts and in life. "It's not about the wider seats or better champagne. It's about understanding that true class has nothing to do with where you sit and everything to do with how you treat people." Alexander nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I've spent years trying to prove I belonged in first class," he admitted, "when I should have been focusing on being first class in how I live." As the Los Angeles skyline appeared through the windows, Wesley shared one final thought. "In martial arts, we learn that true strength isn't in dominating others, but in maintaining balance and respect. Sometimes life has a way of teaching us the same lesson." The plane descended through layers of clouds, the cabin falling quiet as each passenger reflected on what they had witnessed. This wasn't just a story about a celebrity encounter, it was a reminder that every interaction carries the potential for growth, for connection, for transformation. Sarah Chin began preparing the cabin for landing, but not before hearing Alexander say something that surprised everyone. "Mr. Snipes," he said, his voice humble but sincere, "thank you. Not for who you are, but for showing me who I could be." Wesley's response was characteristic of the man who had handled the entire situation with such grace. "Thank you for reminding me that everyone deserves a chance to show their better self. Sometimes we just need the right moment to let it shine through." As the aircraft touched down at LAX, the story of what happened on that flight was already spreading through messages and calls. But the real story wasn't about a celebrity encounter or a humbled hedge fund manager. It was about the possibility of change, the power of genuine connection, and the truth that real class isn't something you wear, it's something you demonstrate through your actions. Rebecca Wong, putting the finishing touches on her notes, realized she had witnessed something far more valuable than a simple incident of comeuppance. She had seen a masterclass in handling conflict with grace, in transforming confrontation into connection, in choosing kindness over revenge. The seatbelt sign chimed its final alert as the plane taxied to the gate. In the golden California sunshine, Alexander Burke straightened his tie one last time, not as a symbol of status, but as a reminder of a lesson learned at 35,000 feet. Wesley gathered his book and stood, offering a genuine smile to everyone around him. "Safe travels, everyone," he said, his words carrying the same warmth whether addressed to flight crew or first-class passengers. "Remember, every journey has the potential to teach us something about ourselves." As the passengers began to disembark, the story of what happened on that flight was already becoming the kind of tale that would be shared in boardrooms and coffee shops alike. A reminder that true class isn't about where you sit, but how you treat others when you think no one of importance is watching. Let us know in the comments if you've ever experienced a moment that changed your perspective on success and status. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, and every day brings new opportunities to choose kindness over judgment, understanding over assumption, and genuine connection over superficial status. Remember to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us that the most important transformations often happen when we least expect them, and that true class isn't something you showcase. It's something you live.